Hello again, and welcome to today's broadcast of Practically Political, where pragmatists talk politics. I'm Dave Spencer, founder of Practically Republican, and we have another special guest today. Julie Mason is the host of The Press Pool on SiriusXM's POTUS, Politics of the United States channel. Julie was the White House correspondent for the Houston Chronicle, Washington Examiner, and Politico during the George W. Bush administration and the first term of the Barack Obama administration. She has also been the secretary and board member of the White House Correspondents Association. Julie, welcome to the show.
Dave, it's great to be on with you. Thanks.
First off, I think it would be safe to say that you speak to more national political reporters and commentators on a weekly basis than almost anyone in the country. For better or worse.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone else.
What's it like directing traffic, if you will, amongst people who eat, sleep, and breathe politics?
Boy, it is fascinating. When I was a working reporter myself, one of my favorite things was to talk to other reporters about what they were working on, what was going on. You learn so much. You pick up so much. You kind of bounce ideas off each other. And now I get to do it for a living, and so much has changed just with Trump coming to town. The whole business of journalism has changed. And one good thing that's come out of it is a lot of us are really talking about how we do our jobs, and how we can do it better and better serve the interests of readers and listeners and viewers. There's a real strong conversation going on. That needed to happen.
And your ratings have never been better.
Yeah. People are really paying attention, and I worry. I feel like, and I've said this on the show, I feel like in a working democracy, people should be able to tune out the news, not completely, but go about their lives and feel like, well, call me if there's a big story and I'll pay attention, but I got to get the kids to school and et cetera. And you should be able to do that. But in the current climate, I feel like people don't feel like they have the luxury of doing that.
Well, as the host and the moderator, and sometimes even mediator, is it challenging to keep your own opinion to yourself when you have really strong feelings about an issue? And could you give us an example of an issue that really makes you bite your tongue?
I'm trying to think. I've been a journalist for 30 years now, Dave. I started out as a local reporter, made my way up to the White House. So no, it's hard to explain to people outside of the biz, but when you're a journalist, first of all, you don't really care about outcomes, and if you start to care about the news, you'd just be a basket case. You wouldn't be able to do the job. So most of us have this ability to just switch it off, and sure, we have, I guess, values and views that we have, but they don't inform my work. And I can't even remember the last thing I felt really strongly about. Actually, I do. I can. But it actually had to do with the news and with journalists. I was covering the Bush White House during the Iraq War and its aftermath, and I was starting to get upset because Tony Snow, who was then the press secretary, the late, great Tony Snow, was complaining about how no one was covering any good news and reporters were so biased and everyone was just writing these terrible stories about how bad Iraq was, and he was really going to town on it every day, like things in Iraq are great. You journalists just won't tell the story. And I had friends over there who were risking their lives to tell the story, and they were really trying to do an earnest and honest, good job of it. And I started to take what Tony was saying really personally. I started to internalize it, and I started to get very upset about what he was saying. And a colleague of mine, Ken Herman from the Austin American-Statesman, pulled me aside and said, "You're taking this too personally. You need to take some time off. You need to step away because," and he was saying, once you start to take the news personally and start to get upset, you're doing your job wrong, and you need to go think about that and come back, a little perspective, a little distance, and get refreshed. And that was really good advice, and I do that whenever I start to get worked up. I step back, I take a little news break, get a little distance, and then I come back fresh. And in order to do this job, you need to have that professional distance, which keeps you actually from feeling things. There's a downside to it, Dave, and I'm sure you've heard this. Journalists have this terrible sort of gallows humor, and we really lack sensitivity about human suffering a lot of times and things that people go through, because in order to maintain that distance, sometimes it can also make us be terrible people. But to me, that's a price you have to pay just in order to maintain sort of professional objectivity.
And one of the things I've noticed is that for people like you and me too, who live and breathe it every day, one of the disadvantages is I don't think we appreciate how most Americans just aren't paying attention to it the way we are. And that's why I think they're giving Trump more time, and they're just not as riled up as a lot of people who are so on the inside of it. But I also wanted to ask you, given that you've been a White House correspondent and have hosted hundreds, if not thousands, of guests on the press pool. How would you crystallize the traditional relationship between the government and the news media, especially for people who don't understand what it's really like to be immersed in Washington's political fishbowl?
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be adversarial. As a journalist, you're holding them to account. You're getting up in their face. There's also an element of cultivating them as sources. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't know much about. You know, at the White House especially, Dave, everyone fixates on the briefing. You know, like the public fixates on the briefing. Briefing isn't really how news is gathered at the White House. It's an important exercise, and I think it's more than just symbolic. But for most reporters at the White House, a briefing is just an hour out of your day when you wish you could be doing something else. And a lot of the reporting gets done in the hallways and in phone calls and emails and just around and about. But most reporters don't rely on the briefing for news gathering.
The issue that makes me bite my tongue is this whole thing with Trump and the way he attacks the media, because if it weren't for all the free media, he clearly wouldn't be president, right? So he wants to have it both ways. And we've clearly entered a new universe, some might say alternate universe, with Donald Trump, who's labeled the news media the enemy of the American people. You know, stakes his claim that everything he disagrees with is fake news.
Yeah, there's the news media and the adversarial nature of it, and Trump trying to make it worse, trying to act like we're at war with him. You know, I think for most, especially White House reporters, the issue is not what he says about us. Everyone hates us. Everyone smack talks reporters. You know, you just got to keep your game face on when that happens. The real test of that is, does this administration provide access and information to journalists so they can do their jobs? And I got to tell you, for the most part, until kind of recently, this was a really accessible administration. We have opportunities to ask the president questions almost every day and to clap eyes on him as often as possible. That's what reporters want. And also to get questions answered from his designees. Now, Sarah and Sean have not done a great job of answering questions in the briefing. But again, like, the briefing is not the everything. There's other ways to get your questions answered by this White House. So until recently, when the president started to disappear a little bit and wasn't answering questions, reporters were very pleased because, you know, say what you will, yeah, we're enemies of the United States, whatever, say your thing, talk about us as fake media, and Jim Acosta having his meltdown notwithstanding, most reporters were pretty happy with the level of access. You know, he hasn't done many press conferences, but there was still access to the president. You know, lately that's eroded a little bit as things have gone a little bit sideways, but definitely bears watching.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of these personal connections? It just makes me wonder about the effect on the whole social gatherings. I read a piece in Political about this, on how, you know, the Georgetown is a historical term. It's not really something that exists today. And I love your whole thoughts on that scene in the new uncharted territory of the Trump era.
Yeah, boy. They have really changed the culture of Washington. It's incredible. There's like the whole dinner party, getting the administration officials to your party as like a sort of statusy event. I recently organized an event, in fact, a going-away party for Carol Lee, who's leaving the Wall Street Journal to go to NBC News. And Sean Spicer showed up, and that gave the party a little frisson, Dave. People were excited to see him. He was there. It was right. It felt important, and it reminded me of that story in Politico about how the sort of chattering class of Washington is dead. So yeah, when Sean or Kellyanne or one of them shows up to your party, it's still a big deal. They don't do it very often.
No, and I think there was always that give and take where people in the White House wanted to give reporters the feeling, okay, you've got a little bit of an inside access, and now, you know, maybe you'll write the story a little better. On the flip side, I really can't recall reading more incisive analysis and commentary than during the last 8 months. In some ways, has there ever been a better time to be a political journalist?
It's always a good time to be a political journalist. I will say, Dave, the most incisive analysis I've read is by Republicans, like Michael Gerson, for example, who was a speechwriter for George W. Bush, writing in the Washington Post. Sometimes there's a lot of anguish, and it's sort of like primal scream therapy for him. But Republicans who are not on Team Trump, their analysis and sort of talking about Republican values and where this administration deviates from them, I think has been some of the most stimulating writing in the sort of news. I mean, they're not news reporters, obviously, but sort of in the news business. That's been really, really interesting to read and to see on TV, too, their analysis on TV from Republicans. I think Republicans are having a fascinating family conversation right now, and it's really interesting to cover as a journalist.
Do you find it challenging to find a balance of opinion from your guest when so many GOP leaders have developed a more adversarial relationship with the media? It just seems like they almost feel this obligation to toe the line, even if they don't really believe it.
You know, what I find most difficult, and it's an ongoing challenge for me, is to find really great Republicans who do support Trump. And that's not to say the ones who support Trump aren't great in their way, but you see them, and you see cable struggles with it too, to find people who can have a conversation and have some knowledge and aren't just like reflexively defending the administration. That's not useful. But to find someone who can like talk about the issues and like explain America first, like what that means in application, rather than just Mr. Trump is right about everything, and to question him just means you're a liberal, or right. You know, the talking points and the yapping. It's not a good conversation, and it doesn't serve listeners' interests. So, I mean, there's a few here in town. Mr. Feary, for example, is one as a member of the establishment who got on the Trump train early and, like, it doesn't shy from criticizing, saying, yeah, I think he'd get off Twitter, but, you know, what he's trying to do over here is really good, and here's how that works, and let me explain it to you. I find that really useful, and those kinds of Republicans are pretty thin on the ground. On
a personal note, your Wikipedia page, it references your, quote, body personality and quick wit, and likened your show to a political happy hour, which I think a sense of humor is key. I mean, that's kept me going all these years. But, you know, with the country so deeply divided, there's such a sense of negativity and mistrust in the air. But I get the sense that you're really having fun amidst all this discord and acrimony. How does someone who's naturally funny walk the fine line between humor and gravity?
Well, I know my worst days are when something really, really serious happens, and I actually have to be quite grim on the air. And so when I have to tone it down and be serious, that actually like sort of gives me physical pain. But it's a fine line. And I think one of my goals for the show, Dave, was to talk about politics the way we actually talk about it, not the way we talk about it on TV or on the radio, but when we're sitting around with a bunch of drinks and talking about it. It's like, so what are you hearing? Like, so what did they tell you? You know, stuff like that. And to actually have a conversation, not just have it be robotic and boring, because I think people are tired of it. When we talk about authenticity and Trump's authenticity, I think people want authenticity in media, too. Some of the best moments on my show are when a journalist is talking about an interview they had that didn't make the story. You know, which always for reporters and journalists, it's always like some anecdote or quote that to them like summed up the whole thing, and some dumb editor cut it out, or it got cut on the, you know, production floor or whatever. It didn't make the story, but to them it meant something. And when they say, so there's this one thing that didn't make my story, and they talk about it, and it just shines this bright light onto whatever topic we're talking about. And that to me is like a really valuable thing that I can bring to listeners that they don't get anywhere else, in addition to a conversation and a certain amount of irreverence. It's not for everyone. Some people want the NPR style, you know, everything very dry, everything delivered serious. And I understand that people in this country are very frightened right now, and they're frightened about the future, and they don't want a lot of levity. So my show is not going to be for those people. We don't laugh all day long and make stupid jokes, but we can have a laugh at the absurdity of it sometimes without sacrificing any of the seriousness.
No, I agree. And, you know, my personal experience have taught me if you can't laugh at yourself or your circumstances, it's going to eventually get you down. And I have to ask you, rumor has it that you're known for your impersonations of certain political figures. Who are your favorites? And would you mind sharing a couple of snippets with us?
Lately, I've been perfecting my Kellyanne Conway impression, Dave, because she's trying to restore confidence in this administration. And I think you're doing a very bad job with this podcast, and you need to examine your priorities. I practice that one in the bathroom. I practice them in the bathroom because it's got like a good echo. She's a good one. Also, Laura Bush thinks that you're terrific, Dave. Your podcast is fabulous, and you should keep doing what you're doing.
I'm a little impressed you didn't do the easiest target, Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, the government. Oh, you're being swindled. Which actually sounds more like Eleanor Roosevelt, but I think there's a lot of overlap there.
That's why I wish Trump had gone to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The guy just can't laugh at himself. You know, Obama had great timing, and that's one of the things that kept it late.
Everyone hated how Obama laughed at his own jokes, but I thought it was kind of funny. I hope President Trump goes next year. Deep down, he kind of loves reporters, and he loves to have them in his office. Every reporter in town has a story about, like, bumping into him, or, there were like a couple of Politico reporters who were in the building doing something unrelated, and he was like, oh, they're here? Bring them in. And they got like an impromptu 45-minute interview with the guy. He loves to like talk to reporters and have them in his office and give them a Diet Coke and talk about stuff that's going on, and he follows his coverage so closely. It reminds me a lot of Newt Gingrich, remember, who scored so many points during the campaign for attacking John King and talking about the media, but no one loves their media more than Newt Gingrich.
Julie, as a pragmatist and an optimist, I always ask our guests one final question. What do you see as the good news coming out of Washington? And what gives you hope for the future?
I think that people's worst fears won't be realized because there are checks and balances, and you see them coming into play. I've never seen all at once the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive fully engaged in life. And then, for example, other checks and balances, you saw states rise up against the election commission that the president had put together. They didn't like it. They felt like that was taking away their rights, their sovereign rights to run their own states. So I think that people's worst fears won't be realized, but it's testing the system. The Trump presidency is testing the boundaries of the system. But to give in to despair is to abdicate your responsibility. And what I see is the underpinnings of our system are alive and they're working. And as a government nerd, it's so exciting to see.
I'm actually glad you didn't bring up Chris Kobach till the end of our interview, because that's the one that makes me bite my tongue. But anyway, folks, you've been listening to our conversation with Julie Mason, host of the Press Pool on SiriusXM's POTUS, Politics of the United States channel. Julie, thanks for appearing on the show, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Dave. Great to talk to you.
So that's it for today. I'll see you on our next round of Practically Political, where we go beyond the deluge of everyday news to dive deeper into American politics. I'm Dave Spencer. Have a great week.